What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Appreciate you guys tuning in for another video. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. We're still doing 3 videos a week right now, so we don't want you to miss out on any of those future videos. If you guys are looking for more content, check out our members only page as well. There's lots of cool stuff on there. A little more access to us, you know, personal live streams, stuff like that. Not personal, members only live streams every month. And really, you know, it's really just a cool opportunity for you guys to get more connected with us. So if you're interested in that, check out our members only page as well. All right, so today I am spooling up a brand new rod and reel. We're going to have more on these rods here real soon. They're about ready to launch. This is the new rods that I'm using this year. Yeah, more on that coming real soon. But we're going to do a little video on how I spool up a brand new rod and reel baitcaster edition. You know, I did this on a spinning rod, and one of you guys, I forget exactly who it was, but you guys asked if I could do a video on a bait casting, on how I spool up. And there's one crucial tip that I'm going to give you guys towards the end of this video, so you're going to want to make sure you stay tuned. And it's really just going to save, you know, the life of your line that's on the reel. It's going to help you cast further. So it's really important to pay attention and watch this whole video through. But before we get into that, it kind of leads me to this. You know, I just talked about it. If you guys have any ideas for videos, we're always looking for more video ideas. So make sure to drop them in the comments down below. You know, we always try and, you know, read. Well, obviously I read every comment, but I always try to, you know, help you guys out. So if there's any video ideas that you have, make sure you drop them down below. But all right, let's jump in. Let's spool up a brand new rod and reel. Okay, so I have here a 7'1" medium heavy rod. So I'm spooling this up with Seaguar and Vizex. This is probably the fluorocarbon that I use the most. You know, definitely on my bait casters, this gets the most use. And I like the 15-pound size. That probably gets the most use. This is just the most versatile line that I have. So I'm spooling up 15-pound Seaguar and Vizex. And we're starting from scratch. Literally, we have nothing on here. It's a brand new rod and reel. I mean, this reel's never even been casted. This rod's never even been casted actually as well. So this is a brand new setup right here. So I'm going to walk you guys through the whole process that I like. So when I'm spooling up a new rod, I actually like to spool up all the way through the rod backwards, I guess. You know, I start at the top and I take the line coming off the spool and I run it down through the guides all the way down to the reel. Typically, you know, once you have line on your reel, you're running it the other way, running it up to the top of the rod. But I like to start at the top and run it down to the reel. And now we get down to the reel. So I'm going to tighten up my drag and you run it through the line guide right there. Okay, now you're into the spool. And you know, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You know, if your spool has holes in it, I pretty much just like to run the line through one of those holes. And you want to leave a little slack. See, if you pull that too tight, it pops right out of there. So you want to leave a little bit of slack and start winding until that line kind of wraps around itself. So let's get it through there. Now if, you know, a lot of guys like to wrap all the way around the spool and tie a knot. You know, there's no right or wrong way to do this when you're using fluorocarbon. But you see, if I leave that pretty loose, I can wrap it around and then tighten it up. But now that line has wrapped around itself. Okay, so there's no way for that to spin. It's tight. It's gripping against itself, so it's not going to pull out of that hole there now. So now we're pretty much started on our rod and reel. Now, one crucial tip, you know, whether you're using a 200-yard spool or, you know, a 1,000-yard spool, is I want that line to pull and that spool to spin as the line comes off. I don't want to set this down flat like this and have that line pull off, because you can see it leaves a twist in it and it makes that line twisted on your spool. It's going to give you, you know, less casting distance, less life, make the line actually weaker because it's twisted. And honestly, it's going to make you backlash a little bit more because of that twist in there. So I always want to set this spool against something. I usually set it right here against the side of the boat. If I have a 200-yard spool, this little slot right here, oh, I got all my old baits in there right now, but this little slot on the Phoenix fits a 200-yard spool perfectly, so I can set him in there and just get to spooling him up. So now, you see, I want that spool to be spinning like that as I'm winding up this reel. So we're going to take our time, fill this reel up. So one quick tip I'll give you guys, this is one of the things that I see most average fishermen, weekend fishermen, this is a mistake I see a lot of them make, is they don't fill their reels all the way up. And maybe they did at one point and then they lost some line and they're just using it. But if I look at the reel of your average fisherman on the lake, I would say most of the reels are filled up about that much right there. It kind of looks full, but if you actually look at the depth of the spool, there is quite a distance between that line and the top of the spool. So you want to fill that line all the way up to the top of the spool. That's going to give you better casting distance, and it's going to actually, if you don't fill it up all the way, it actually affects your gear ratio. Well, it doesn't really affect the gear ratio. What it does affect is the amount of line that you pick up per turn of the handle, which is essentially what the gear ratio is all about. This is a 7.4 to 1 gear ratio. So what that means is each turn of the handle, the spool turns 7.4 times. But if the circumference of that spool is smaller because your line's not full, you're picking up less line. So you want that spool to be as full of line as possible to make sure that your reel's operating the way that it should be as far as a line inch per turn of the handle. That's a wild jumble of words right there. Okay, so this, you can see that is a full spool of line right there. That is all the way to the top of the spool. You can't see that gap between the line and the top of the spool now, and that is spooled up, ready to go. So now, should use my scissors, but I always like to just bite my line. So this rod reel lined up, spooled, ready to go. So now, tie on my bait and I'm ready to go fishing. So what we got landing here? We got anything? Let's just tie on a chatterbait just for now. This is not the rod I typically throw a chatterbait on, but we're just going to throw it on here so I can have something tied on. Now, the little tip that I mentioned at the beginning is once you get this spooled up, and this is kind of the reason that I do this whole process the way that I do it. I want to start at the top, go all the way down. That way, when I'm done, I'm ready to tie something on. I don't have to spool up anything like that. I'm ready to go. But the reason is once you spool some fresh line on your reel, you never want to cut this off and allow that line to go back through that guide. Okay, so if we were to break this off and I was done for the day, what I actually do is I just tie a loop on the end of my rod and leave it spooled all the way up through the guides and just hook that loop on my reel handle or on the hook keeper or whatever, so that line stays spooled up all the way through here. Because here's what happens. If this line were to cut and go into the spool and now you're just left with your line, spinning around the spool, I don't think I have any laying around. I don't really do this very often because of this reason. What ends up happening is that line actually gets loose on there and it'll actually twist around itself. And basically what it does is tie an overhand knot on itself. Now it's pretty loose, so you could open the spool and pull that line out and you really wouldn't notice it, but it's actually wrapped around itself and it's rubbing itself, it's weakening your line, and it really affects your casting distance. So what happens is the first couple casts, once that happens, if you were to cut your line their line falling here, it spins around a couple times, it gets wrapped around another loop. So essentially it tied an overhand knot on itself. But now you spool it back up, you're ready to go, you go cast. That first cast, it actually, you know, keeps pushing that overhand knot further and further down into your spool. You know, as you make that long cast, that line rubs against itself and gets all the way down in there. So every time you make a longer cast, it's affecting it. And what ends up happening is, you know, you'll get it set to, you know, your longest cast that you're going to make. And then, you know, you cut some line off, you break your bait off so it goes a little further up. And then you make that cast again, make that super long cast again, and it kind of hits that knot and it causes your reel to backlash because it's not fully or freely spinning off of there. So that little tip right there will save you guys a bunch of line in the long run. So simple. Once you spool it up, do not ever let it go back through the line guide on the reel. I try not to let it even go back through the guides on my rod just because I don't want to have to spool it up, you know, more often than I ever have to. So typically if I were to break this off, I'm just going to tie a loop right here and hook it on here. But definitely do not ever let it go through the guide on the reel, or else it's going to twist on itself, cause that knot, and it's going to cause problems in the long run. So hopefully you guys learned something from this video. You know, that's a little tip that I see a lot of guys make. And like I said, I appreciate the viewer, the subscriber that left the comment for this video idea. It's a great idea, and hopefully you guys can learn something from this. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Hopefully you're getting out on the water here soon. Leave me all those likes, comments, good stuff down below. Hit that subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys next time.